Tips from Trestle is brought to you by the Belter Companies, Navigator Group Purchasing, and eMenu Choice Point of Sale. Welcome to Tips from Trestle, the Senior Living Food and Hospitality Podcast. This podcast explores the senior living industry with a unique focus on food, hospitality, and the community experience. I'm your host, Aaron Fish. During 3 decades in the hospitality industry, I focused my work on creating exceptional experiences for the customers we serve. My goal for this podcast? Educate, inform, and inspire leaders in senior living. How? By creating hospitality with a purpose, by bringing the customer experience to the front of mind in our industry. We should bring the passionate spirit of food and hospitality to everything that we do and everyone we serve each and every day. So what are we waiting for? Let's get to it. Today on Tips from Trestle, I'm joined by Taylor Smith. Taylor has always had a passion for food, health, and wellness, and being a native New Yorker, she has worked in the restaurant industry as well as in fitness studios throughout NYC. Having graduated with her master's in food studies from NYU in 2020, Taylor is also a certified personal trainer as well as certified in culinary nutrition. Before receiving her master's degree, Taylor worked as a broker in the commercial real estate industry as well in New York City. Taylor developed the recipe and concept for Broma to help her grandmother with a protein deficiency easily and deliciously meet her nutritional needs. Currently working on developing Broma's business channels and expanding the platform to include more SKUs and a wider reach, Taylor handles all things operations, e-commerce, sales, and product innovation. Outside of work, Taylor is a board member for the Jeffrey Modell Foundation, working towards ameliorating primary immunodeficiency in children. Taylor has worked on Broma since its ideation stage in fall of 2018. Taylor, thanks for joining me today on Tips from Trestle.
Thanks so much for having me, Aaron. It's great to be here.
So you're a unique guest on my podcast. Usually I'm speaking to somebody who's in food service operations or senior living. We're talking about all sorts of things. But I wanted to talk with you because I think the idea around developing a product, a food product itself, is interesting. And I think our listeners would really gain some insight on stuff they're using in their kitchens and in their operations, and why some things are successful and some things aren't. And so I want to learn a little bit more about why you decided to do Broma. Obviously, going through your background, food is important, but it's not necessarily what you've always done. And so it's interesting to me to kind of know, how did you start Broma? What was the idea behind it?
Sure. So I started Broma while I was getting my master's degree, and I was taking a class that was kind of a cross between entrepreneurship as well as the food studies program that I was doing. And we were tasked with building either a food product or something related to food in some way, whether it was technology or something else. And through this process, my grandmother, who was 96 at the time, she's now 99, was told that she was deficient in protein and that she needed to supplement in some way. So that kind of set me on this path, by virtue of this course, to do a ton of research into the elderly population. And I ended up finding out that the elderly population not only has issues with their taste receptors, so they're just not able to taste things as readily as they once were, but there's also some issues surrounding their ability to absorb the nutrients from their food, meaning that I could be eating the same exact meal as my grandmother, but I will absorb a bit more of the nutrients from that plate versus her, who won't be absorbing as much. So what that just means is there needs to be some supplementation. And by the same token, a lot of elderly people feel as though they've been doing a certain thing a certain way for many years and it's been working for them. So why make these changes, and not realizing that this is an issue? So this is where kind of Broma came in. I wanted her to be able to eat something that she enjoyed, and she actually loves chocolate and almonds. So I thought of incorporating that together would be easy, especially something as versatile as a nut butter, where you could just spread it on something or eat it as by the spoonful or have it as a snack with fruit, or just it was just something that you could just easily incorporate without really thinking about it, and without it being sort of like, oh, I have to add this additional thing because I have this issue. It was just, oh, I'll just eat this as a snack because I like it and it tastes good. And the other options were really like Ensure or other like, things that didn't really meet that mark in the same way.
Yeah, you hit on a really important point that we struggle with, I think, when it comes to food and nutrition in senior living, which is the supplementation needs, because taste receptors, everything you mentioned are daily issues that we have as a culinary professionals, that we have as a challenge. And so, a lot of times we always go to what's the easiest, what's the most operationally effective, and you mentioned Ensure. And I don't know how many times, in my career, I've had to work through, well, I don't want to make that the only option. Some people don't mind having a protein shake as an additional thing, but others said they want something more traditional, more that feels like I'm actually just eating. And so being able to have something to snack on is really important to supplement. So,
Yeah, and I
um,
think there's something to be said for having a whole food option, whether it's Broma or something else that like fills in those nutritional gaps, instead of like a shake that has, it could have a ton of preservatives in it or other fillers that just makes it feel not as natural.
yeah, and the other piece of that puzzle is it like you said, like think about how we currently are eating, right? Like I think about like on the weekends or something, like I get hungry in the middle of the afternoon, I want a snack. I don't immediately think maybe I should just go grab that protein shake out of the fridge, right?
Hmm.
Whereas, we're kind of built and tuned into this. Well, let me just grab a snack, and like, butter and apples or crackers or whatever is a natural fit. And so how does Roma fill in that gap of, okay, we've got that normal peanut butter and crackers snack. Roma does more. So kind of tell us a little bit about what it does more and how it's designed to add that additional nutritional need. Today, I want to tell you about one of Trestle's senior living partners, Belter. Belter is a food service design, equipment, and supply company that has been providing expert guidance to the food and beverage industry for nearly a century. A strategic partner to the most successful food service operations in the country, Belter provides support in kitchen and bar design, equipment procurement and install, and supplies. Their team of senior living food service experts have experience across the continuum of care. From independent living to skilled nursing and CCRCs, Belter specializes in right-sizing new facilities, modernizing remodels, and providing the right food service equipment and supplies. At Belter, they are committed to creating memorable experiences for their customers and their guests. With their top-notch team and a global network of quality supplier partners, their customer-focused approach is built on a foundation of collaboration and decades of industry experience. So thank you for considering Belter for all of your food service needs.
Sure. Yeah. So Broma is actually a almond and lentil based nut butter, a dark chocolate almond and lentil based nut butter. So almonds and lentils in combination create a complete protein. So that just means they have all 9 essential amino acids. So in the like scientific background of this, it's just that there's 21 amino acids, your body creates 12, and you need to supplement the remaining 9 with your food, which theoretically should be easy if you're eating a varied diet. But I think a lot of times, nutrition falls by the wayside for a lot of people, not just the elderly. You're not paying attention, you're running around, you just miss things. So this is just a really easy way to get those in. Whereas your average, plain nut butter has protein in it. It's just not a complete protein. So it doesn't provide that amino acid profile, which we ultimately all need. So that's what really makes it different in that spectrum.
And when you were developing it, obviously the need began with, knowing your grandmother's nutritional situation. Was the senior living or the senior market always your focus, your target market, or has that evolved over time?
Actually, they were my original target market. So the senior community was my original focus, the community I wanted to target and have that be what the business was. And after selling the product in some markets, in New York, just seeing if people liked the product, if I needed to make any tweaks recipe wise or anything of that nature, I found out that there was other people outside of the elderly population that were interested in the product and wanted it for their kids because they had picky eaters or they were just running around too much and, they couldn't pay attention to their nutrition. So this would just be a good option for them. So the elderly population was my first market. And then it kind of evolved to include a much younger population just by virtue of them needing it in different ways.
Yeah, it's funny. You were gracious enough to send me a couple of samples to try, so that way I could talk more about the product. My oldest is that picky eater that you just mentioned. He's 13, and he loves peanut butter, but it's always hard, like really like picky at dinner time. And I had him try this, and he was like, "This is great. I love this." And so, he's gone through the samples all by himself almost because it's something that is familiar to him. It does taste good. And I now don't have to worry. I was always harping on him. You got to get your protein, you got to get your nutrients. And it's a really great solution, not just for elderly, but for the younger people as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's great to hear when people like the product. It's always like a little bit of a validator, like, okay, we're doing something right.
Yeah. Well, I love dark chocolate, so it was pretty easy for me to fall in love with it because of that. So I've always been intrigued by this because I've got a pretty varied background in food service, but one of the things I've never done is be a part of the food manufacturing process. And so I'd love for you to kind of talk to us a little bit about how you go about doing that, how you get involved. Like, is this something you do in your kitchen at home? Like, when do you know to move to a commercial space? Like, all those things are really interesting. So I'd love to talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so when I started the business, I had no idea either. So it was definitely, steps of learning as I went, but I created the original recipe in my parents' kitchen, in a food processor, did that for a bit and sold it at outside markets. And then I slowly moved into a commercial kitchen in Queens. And I was creating product sort of, just figuring it out as I went. And I did that for about a year. I really did not like the manufacturing it myself process, mostly because it's very labor intensive. You go in for an 8-hour shift and you're on your feet the whole time because you want to make use of the time as best you can and create as much product as humanly possible. And there was a ton of learning experiences by doing that, just by figuring out, how many ingredients to order and like what companies to contact and how to deal with the health department. And, just a ton of things are happening all at once. So it was a good experience for sure, but just definitely something I was like, okay, I need to find a manufacturer because this is not where my headspace should be. I need to be focusing on other things surrounding the company with sales and marketing. And there's a ton of other things to do. And manufacturing was sucking up a lot of that time. So I ended up reaching out to a bunch of different co-packers, we call them, in the New York, New Jersey area. And I quickly found out that there are minimum order quantities, and we didn't necessarily reach those minimum order quantities. So it was definitely a long process to find a manufacturer that would work with us and help us start out with the manufacturing process. And we actually originally used glass jars, and I quickly realized that that was not great for manufacturing either, because a lot of manufacturers don't work with glass because if something breaks, there's a lot of issues with the manufacturing line. They have to, basically take everything down and clean it, and it's very annoying for them. So they would prefer not to work with glass. Not only that, glass is very heavy to ship, and which is very costly for not only us as a brand, but also the consumer who's receiving it. And then the third issue is glass breaks. And there's a lot of issues with shipping. I'm sure you've seen those
Oh
videos
yeah.
of UPS workers, just throttling the boxes at people's doors, and everything
Yeah.
shatters. So it was definitely a learning experience for sure. Figuring out how to get it manufactured and all of that stuff. It's still something like we have to pay attention to all the time. Manufacturing is like a constant. You really got to stay on top of things to like know what's going on. But we ultimately, for the recipe at least, we hired a food scientist to help us tweak the recipe a bit, make it a little bit more shelf stable, a little bit smoother, all of that good stuff. So it definitely has iterated from my original kitchen recipe to what it is now.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up because I was going to ask you about the recipe and how you go about doing that. You mentioned hiring a food scientist. Is that something that, I think about when we're developing recipes for serving, right? We're going to we'll either set up shop in the kitchen or maybe we'll go out to like a distributor's test kitchen and we'll test products and we'll build things. But I would think that I don't know, we'll just say like a grilled chicken recipe, we're doing some sort of tweak on that. That's probably not the same process that as you would have to go through to make something like Broma. And so kind of give us a little bit more detail on how that works, like how you go through the different iterations and how do you know that a product is ready for market?
Navigator is the largest full-service GPO that exclusively focuses on the senior living community. And what that means is we provide products and services that help our members provide a great environment for their residents, such as like MRO, hospitality equipment, food, business products, as well as technology solutions. We actually surround our members with a level of support unmatched in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And I think probably everybody would have a different answer for that. But because I already kind of had a recipe, we were at a good starting point for working with the food scientist. So I kind of just explained what our flavor profile was, what I wanted the consistency to be like, what I was expecting the shelf life to be at a minimum. And we kind of worked around those points of differentiation to make it work. And then the food scientist would send us little samples in the mail. And I'd have a bunch of people try them to make sure, is it too salty? Is it too gritty? Is it smooth? Is it not smooth? All that kind of stuff, to get to where we were. So it was definitely an iterative process. It took quite a few samples to get where we needed to be. And then once you have that base recipe, you need the manufacturer to also run it through to make sure that they're doing it the way you want it as well. So you can give it to a manufacturer, and because of all of the involvement with their machinery and lost product within the process, you may need to make some tweaks, whether it's adding some more oil because it's lost in the machinery when it's going through, or whatever the case may be. So you start with that initial recipe and then you go to the manufacturer and then make some additional tweaks from there. So it's a multi-step process.
So you're not actually in like the lab or the kitchen with the food scientist. They are doing their own kind of work on the side or separately, and then sending you back variations or versions for you to try in that process.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because they have a lab and they're analyzing everything. So I don't think I'd be very helpful, honestly.
Do they also are they developing kind of the nutritional profile at the same time that they're doing that for you? Like you're saying, hey, I wanted to make sure it has 10 grams of protein per serving and that has this and it has this. Is that part of that process, or do you get the flavor profiles and then figure out how to beef up those numbers on the back? How does that process look?
The food scientist can definitely help you do that. If you say, I want it to only have 3 grams of sugar per serving, or 10 grams of protein, like you mentioned. Yes, you can definitely have them aware of that, and they'll try and like meet those markers based on all of the other factors you have in there, because sometimes you may want 10 grams of protein, but the consistency just isn't there with the mix of ingredients in that variation. So you'll have to settle for 8 or something of that nature. But yeah, you can definitely give them those points of differentiation and make it work for you, or have them make it work for you.
Yeah. And then when you go to the manufacturing process, do they have their own team that like helps you figure out how to tweak the recipe to get to the consistency, or does that food scientist get involved at that point as well?
Yes, the food scientist does get involved with the manufacturer. They also kind of ask what sort of not materials, but machinery that the manufacturer has, so they can make adjustments on their end, because they've created recipes for manufacturers in the past. So they know, oh, if we make it this certain way with that machinery that your manufacturer has, it'll turn out this way, or they'll make approximations for that type of machinery. So it's definitely good to get them involved with the manufacturer and like get that process going. But you just made me think, by the same token, a lot of times your manufacturer might be able to create recipes with you. So if you want to, let's say, come out with a new flavor of a product or a product line extension of some kind, you can then do that with your manufacturer. But I think like at the outset, when you're just starting with a new manufacturer, you need that food scientist person to have created something with you to get on a good foot with the manufacturer at the starting point.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up. I was curious about this. When you're doing that and you're working with that food manufacturer, I assume that they have some skin in the game. They're obviously the success of the product is something that they want, right? They want to keep that contract to produce it. When you talk about those various different iterations or versions of the product, do they bring their experience or what they've seen work and not work to that? So that way you can use that experience to maybe broaden your line or not broaden your line, as far as, hey, I have this great idea for 7 items, and they're like, hey, we've seen others do that, and maybe don't rush into that. Like, how does that balance work?
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that you can chat with your manufacturer about. Some will be more forthcoming than others about what works and what doesn't. Some people are a bit greedier than others in terms of like, okay, we'll run whatever you want,
Yeah.
But I think it's definitely something you can chat with about them. We haven't done any like crazy product line extensions. We just have our individual jars in the 4 flavors, the original cherry, coconut, and mint chip. And then we have the individual sachets, which aren't really crazy product line extensions in any way. But I have chatted with our manufacturer about doing some sort of like date ball situation where it's Broma based, or product line extensions of that nature, where it still kind of ties back to the original product. And I know they've done that in the past. So that would be like a further conversation of, how has that product done? Did you just run it once, or has it come back multiple times for production? Things like that. But I haven't gotten far enough along in that product line, future plan options yet. So, but I'll let you know how that goes. But yeah, I think it would be a collaborative effort for sure.
Yeah. Well, and so kind of thinking about where you're at in the process, right? We're talking about a product that's a couple years old, 2 or 3 years old on the market. So kind of tell us, if somebody was looking around, like, what is your current like market plan, right? Like, where are you available? Like you mentioned kind of what your product line looks like. Kind of just talk us a little bit about your current situation with the product and availability.
Sure. Yeah. So we are mostly on the East Coast, hopefully expanding west in the near future, but we are in all of the Hannaford market stores in the Northeast, as well as launching in D'Agostino and Gristedes in the New York area. And we'll also be on shelf at Wegmans with our individual packets, hopefully in the next month or so. But other than that, you can always find us online on our website. It's eatbroma.com. We also sell on Amazon and Walmart.com. And we are also with GoPuff in the New York area. So if anyone is a subscriber to GoPuff, you can check us out there and get it straight to your door. I think it's like 15 minutes or less.
Okay, awesome. So kind of as we wrap up here, Taylor, kind of what are your future plans? Is it to, continue what you're doing and just broaden your reach? Do you have new product ideas? Kind of give us maybe a quick peek into the 3, 5, 10-year plan for Broma if you'd like.
Sure. Yeah. So definitely to continue expanding into retail locations. As I mentioned, we want to go west. I think there's a big market for this type of product on the West Coast, like especially in the California area. So we're exploring those options right now, especially as we continue to gain some of these better grocery store accounts. But aside from that, we are definitely interested in doing some product line extensions, maybe a date ball, maybe a bar of some sort, just something with a Broma-esque base. So we're looking into that. Probably we'll just do a bit more flavors right now because I would love to just grow the product the way it is and see how it happens. And then once we have that, customer base that's really pro Broma, to make those product line extensions, and then hopefully do some food service opportunities, in airports or in coffee shops, maybe in some senior living communities would be great as well. But yeah, those are our big ideas for the future couple of years.
Awesome. Well, Taylor, this whole process of like developing a food product is fascinating to me. And hopefully, our listeners will get some insight in how it works, and that it's not just hey, I got this great idea and 6 months later it's on the shelf. It's definitely a process. And I appreciate you kind of letting us peek behind the curtain, if you will, and learn a little bit more about the whole entire thing. And wish you all the success with Broma. And again, thanks for joining me today on Tips from Trestle.
Thanks so much. It was great.
So there you have it, another one in the books. Thanks again, everybody, for listening. Please follow, like, and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts, and follow us on Twitter at Tips from Trestle. You can also learn more about the work I do by following me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and even TikTok. And be sure to check out Trestle Hospitality Concepts at www.trestlehospitalityconcepts.com. I'm your host, Aaron Fish, and this has been another episode of Tips from Trestle.